folks, thanks for tuning in. My name is Chris, I'm the host of this channel. I call it Skunk Ape, and sometimes I'll review, say, a movie or a toy, but mostly what I do, if you've never tuned in before, is a weekly show called Comic Tropes. And what I do is I find various comic books, usually weird ones, sometimes just ones by great creators, and we look at the tropes, the hallmarks, the cliches, etc. that either characters or creators use, and use that as a window to really break down and analyze some really interesting comics. But today I'm doing something slightly different. I'm going to be reviewing a G.I. Joe toy, but the specific reason is, if you look in there, that is an exclusive comic book. Now this is the Alley Viper version 2. He came out in 1993, and this comic book alone will frequently go for about $40 to collectors that want this, because it was only available in some of these action figures in the year 1993. It was never reprinted anywhere else, and it was written and drawn by the creative team on the Marvel G.I. Joe title at that point in time, artist Andrew Wildman and writer Larry Hama. So I've always wanted to read this little mini comic. I saw this figure in a store the other day for $30, and I said, yeah, you know what? I'm going to do a review of the figure and the comic. To me, that's worth it. And afterwards, I'm probably going to pass this on to one of my friends that actually collects G.I. Joe. I'm not going to keep this one for myself after this video. But before I even open it, because it is still sealed, let's just sort of take a look. The card art it's okay. It's good. Obviously, there were official G.I. Joes printed in other countries, like by Fun School in India. You know what? I've got one. Let me show you. So I wasn't planning on doing this. I don't know why. These were what G.I. Joe looked like in India. I'm just saying that the artwork can be a lot worse. And this card is like flimsy, thin cardboard. This is still sturdy. These came out around the same point in time, like 1993. This is also going to go to a G.I. Joe collector friend of mine. I would say this artwork isn't necessarily as cool as some of the stuff we saw from 82 to about 89, but it's not bad. It's certainly not bad. I'm not complaining. The figure's obviously very bright. It's got this logo here, Battle Corps. That Battle Corps logo went on both G.I. Joe and Cobra stuff. It basically just meant they had a spring-loaded missile launcher in it at the time. And then on the back, there's the cross-cell. There's a few figures there, and they were all segmented into teams at this point. There's the Drug Elimination Force, there's Battle Corps, and there's Ninja Force. And you could collect these flag points to trade in on special promotions, so they still had that. They actually mentioned 2 small vehicles. That's kind of unique. And we've got the file card, but I'll look at that a little bit later. I think it's time to open this bad boy up and take a look at the comic book specifically, and then the action figure. Let's do it. This is super thin. This is way smaller than I realized. Oh, there's a cool little ad on the back, and that artwork is by M.D. Bright. He worked on the comic for quite a while. I think he's definitely one of the better artists that they had. Sign me up for 6 monthly issues of G.I. Joe comics. Enclosed with this form is my check for $4.99 and 2 UPC proofs of purchase. Wow, 6 comics for $5 and 2 UPCs. You know, you'd have to buy two of these guys. It's a good price though for a kid. Better than what they charge now. It's interesting. There's some directions on here on how to clip sort of the face mask on, how to load a missile into the spring thing, and how to stand the feet on a stand. It's all kind of stuff I think you could figure out without it, but whatever, it doesn't hurt to have those directions. Alright, so the blister's mostly intact. I'm going to pass this on to a friend. There was something else in there. Let's see what this is. It's a little pamphlet with a small story and an order form to order vehicles that were no longer in stores. G.I. Joe frequently did this, like they would still let you buy stuff that wasn't necessarily in stores, but Hasbro was still producing them. You could get a Quick Kick and Jinx, the G.I. Joe Hovercraft, the G.I. Joe Skyhawk, the Cobra Sea Ray, the Cobra Battle Barge. Nothing too exciting there. The G.I. Joe Hovercraft. Look at that. That's the killer whale. And on the back it says that that was how much? $29.95 and 5 flag points. If you've ever seen the size of the killer whale, it's a really big vehicle. That's, wow. You look back and that just looks like a good deal. If they were still accepting these, I'd order it. So I've got it open. I just scanned the pages. It's only 6 tiny pages. It's very short. I'm amazed that this is consistently selling for $40, but you know, I guess if you're a G.I. Joe fan, this is the only way to get it with an unopened figure, basically. It's pretty rare. It's in good condition, too, for considering it's, over 20 years old. One interesting thing. Larry Hama pretty much wrote all the issues of Marvel Comics G.I. Joe, and he's still writing a lot of issues for G.I. Joe these days with IDW. But he's never really had a co-writer. He had a couple fill-in writers. So there's a guy named Paul Kirchner that apparently helped him co-write this one. That's very unique. I'm going to go through some of the tropes that Larry Hama frequently used in his G.I. Joe stories. I'm not as familiar with what Paul Kirchner's ones are, but he's both a writer and an illustrator who's worked in comic books, both American and European. He's worked in the toy industry, so he's been around a long time and he's written a lot of stuff. So most likely he was working for Hasbro at this point in time and maybe worked more like an editor or something, although there is an editor credited, so I really don't know. It reads like a Larry Hama comic. Let's get into it. The story starts with 3 G.I. Joes emerging from the jungle to a small Cobra base. And the leader of this mission is Stalker. He's whispering, "Good job, Muskrat. You sneaked us right up to Cobra's front door." And Muskrat replies, "Sneaky is my middle name, Stalker." That's right. This guy, G.I. Joe's swamp expert, is ready to claim that his middle name is Sneaky right in front of this guy, G.I. Joe's top ninja commando. The balls on this guy. We've got a couple tropes right off the bat on that one page. Lots of intros, code names. That was very common for these stories to start off with all the characters announcing one another's names. And that's really, of course, because they were there to sell toys. But it's just funny because you'll frequently say like, "Hey, Stalker," on page 1, and never address him as that again for the rest of the story. That was very common. Also, because it's based on toys, a new look. Stalker, Muskrat, and Snake Eyes, the 3 Joes here, they've all had previous versions of action figures, and some of the Cobras that we're going to meet also had multiple editions or versions. So 2 tropes right off the bat. As the story continues, Stalker points out that Cobra is building a base in the upper Amazon, and they've engaged in slavery. They have enslaved the locals and forced them to build the base and a dam behind it. Even though a lot of G.I. Joe stories can have sci-fi elements, writer Larry Hama frequently grounded it somewhere in reality, and realistic war crimes were definitely something that I think he felt passionately about, so he'd weave it into stories. Terrorists, capturing locals and forcing them to be the labor force, unfortunately, that's a very real thing. Snake Eyes and Stalker want to attack the base, but Muskrat kind of wisely points out, "But we're just recon. We've got no air support, no heavy weapons, no explosives." Stalker points out, "We've got the night." But do they? Every page here makes it look like it's bright daylight, so maybe the colorist missed that note. We cut to one of the Cobra perimeter guards. It's a version of a night creeper who is normally portrayed as a ninja, but here he's just a sentry, and he's whining, "This has got to be the most boring duty I've ever pulled." Stalker grabs him from behind and says, "Maybe you're just a boring person, night creeper." Simultaneously, Snake Eyes is delivering some sort of weird ninja kick to another night creeper. I'm not a humongous fan of Andrew Wildman's art here. I know that he's going for foreshortening, but look at Snake Eye's leg. It looks like this humongous bloopy appendage just ripped out of the side of his body. That does not look right. Two more tropes. The Night Creeper is having a little hissy fit. He's got a tantrum going on, and I'm afraid that this is not my personal favorite look for Snake Eyes. I would call that an embarrassing look. This is a comic that had guys that were total weirdos, like Raptor or Big Boa, Killer Croc, Psych Out, Scoop. There were some really embarrassing G.I. Joes and Cobras mixed in. And unfortunately, as much as I absolutely love the character of Snake Eyes and a lot of his different action figures, this one I'm not a fan of. That's not a strong look. Apparently Major Blood is leading this operation, and that would be interesting to comic book readers at this point in time, because at this point in time Major Blood was not really working with Cobra. I mean, he certainly could have been, but that story was never told. He never really came back to Cobra at this point in time. So that's just sort of a weird continuity thing for big fans to notice. Meanwhile, an alley viper jumps up out of the top of the base and points out that he's got a quad 50 cannon that he's going to use to shoot at G.I. Joe. But let's take a close look at this alley viper. First of all, it's absolutely a trope for a character with Viper in their name to appear in a G.I. Joe comic. There were many specialty vipers. You had Televipers and Techno Vipers, Toxo Vipers, Sludge Vipers, Alley Vipers. You probably had a couple Custodian Vipers mixed in there from time to time. Anyway, this particular Alley Viper, that's version 1. But this comic came out with version 2. That's very strange. All these other characters are in their current 1993 toy editions. Why didn't they get the Alley Viper right in his own toy? Cobra's cannon explodes because G.I. Joe had already blocked the barrels. Major Blood shouts out that the G.I. Joes cannot win because they've got plenty of food to last them for months and lots of ammo. So even though they're holed up, they're in no imminent danger. Or so they think. We cut to Muskrat, who is with some of the locals, and he's turning some sort of valve. On the next page, the Cobras are being washed out. Confusingly, G.I. Joe's Muskrat and Stalker seem to be standing right beside the flood of water, but are unaffected. It's just a product, I guess, of this having to be a super fast comic book. And Muskrat says, "Good idea, Stalker, laying pipe from the dam to the vent grate on the blockhouse." But what do we do with the blockhouse now that we flushed Cobra out? Leave it to the folks who built it, Muskrat. They've already got plans for it. And I guess they're chopping it up? Is that their plan? They just want to chop it up into pieces? Figure, why not actually live there? I don't know. They built it. Might as well. So that's the whole comic. It's pretty darn quick. It's still kind of enjoyable for what it is. I mean, you know that it's there to sell a toy and that it's small. So, you know, it serves its purpose. It's kind of fun. I don't absolutely love the artwork. I don't hate it tremendously. It's not the best, but it's not absolute garbage. It's a fun story. Let's take a look at the actual action figures. Supposedly the point of buying this, for me it was really getting this comic, but for most people it would be getting the toy. Let's take a close look at it. So here we have Alley Viper version 2, also known as Battle Core Alley Viper from 1993. And let's take a quick look at his sculpting, his design, and his color scheme. His head is one of the more interesting aspects. He's got some sort of a mask inside a custom helmet. The helmet obviously has sort of fang type details, trying to look vaguely snake-like, I think. And this clips on. This second part of the mask rotates down and covers his head. I don't think he looks as cool with it down. It just looks a little bulky to me. So I tend to like having it up. It just looks like, you know, he's ready for battle. Moving on to his torso, he has some pretty good detail here, actually. He's got some pouches on his shoulders. He's got a knife across his chest, and his chest actually seems to be some sort of vest. Maybe we could assume it's a bulletproof vest. It even has some zipper detailing running all the way up and down. He's got a canister here, which is probably something like a tear gas. An alley viper is an urban commando, so tear gas might make sense there. He's got another pouch. And he's sort of got these two little balls here. And I know that, like, usually G.I. Joe loves to put grenades on people, but I think this looks almost too small for a grenade. I mean, it could be a frag grenade, but I'm just not sure. There's just not enough detail for me to exactly make out what they intended with that. His back is a lot simpler, but that's because he comes with a backpack, so I don't think we're really supposed to see this most of the time. It makes sense. It's a vest that continues, you know, over into the back. It's fine. Nothing too detailed on the waist, and the legs, in terms of sculpting, only have a pouch on his left leg. The right one is bare. But there is some interesting detail in terms of like cloth folds. It isn't just like skin-tight spandex. It looks like he's actually wearing some sort of rugged uniform. A little bit of a junk in the trunk back here, if you ask me, but hey, who knows? Maybe this particular alley viper has a bad diet. Moving down, we have knee-high boots. They're okay. I like the knee guards. They're simple. It's actually a fairly mundane, toned down aspect of this figure, considering he's got this really bright yellow all throughout. Now, I do think that yellow and black make a good contrast, just in terms of if you're looking at the figure, it's got a striking design. But this bright yellow, it's kind of bizarre to me. Why would an urban trooper need such a colorful uniform? I don't quite understand the logic there. Maybe it's supposed to inspire like fear somehow? Like you're going to notice this guy. There's no way you're not going to notice this guy walking down the street. Of course, the version 1 Alley Viper was an even brighter color. He was bright orange and blue. So compared to that, this actually is slightly toned down. It's also worth noting this waist through the legs are from Alley Viper version 1. They just recolored that. And they've sort of got these tiger stripes there. But what's that got to do with urban commando work? I don't know. Moving on to the arms, he's got some sculpting on his right arm. He's got, you know, this bicep area has an embossed UA, which I'm going to assume probably means urban assault. That's a guess, but it makes sense. And then he's got these sort of forearm guards, especially on the underside. I kind of like them. There's just some nice little detailing there. And the other arm mirrors that, except that this embossing is a cobra symbol. That actually looks pretty nice. So sculpting-wise, I would actually call this one of the stronger figures. I just don't have a lot of love for the brightness of it. But it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look too bad. Let's take a look at his accessories. He comes with a backpack. It's actually got a lot of detail. The most striking detail is this sort of crossbow rifle that he comes with. But it's all sculpted on. This isn't removable. And, you know, when he's actually wearing it, you definitely notice that crossbow. And it's sort of frustrating that it doesn't come off. But it doesn't. There's also some grenades down here, some generic pouch, a pretty cool little cobra symbol in the upper corner. I like that. And I think that this might be a mine, like which, you know, you can place in urban environments. It looks to me like some sort of a street mine. You push on that depressor, boom. That's just a guess, but I think that that would make sense for what this figure is. The crossbow design, I don't 100% get it, especially when, if you really look at it, where's this scope supposed to see? Straight into this crossbow guard? Shouldn't this be turned this way? Look at that. You'd be aiming right into the part that blocks it. Doesn't make sense. As part of Battle Core, he came, like all of them, with a spring-loaded missile. And it's bright yellow to match him. You know, it's fine. I feel like it only clips onto his arm okay. Let me try. It's a little tight, in other words. So it's supposed to clip onto his wrist or forearm. But the forearm's a little too thick. It's too loose if I do it this way. But then if I do it this way, it's almost too tight, and I feel like I'm going to break this plastic. This is very, very hard plastic. The hand is slightly softer, and I feel like I'm going to break it. Sometimes I can sort of turn it and twist it a little bit to get it on. I mean, that's sort of on, but it's a little loose. He'd be off balance, but fortunately, he comes with a stand. And as you can see, he came with what was semi-standard by 1993, an accessory tree. So everything here is the same uniform color, but one of the things I did like that they were coming out with at this point in time was a figure stand. So it just snaps onto his little hole in his boot, and it doesn't matter that he's sort of weighted down, at least as long as I balance him a little bit. So there we go. I'll get back to that. We'll break off one of the missiles here, and we'll see how well this works. You don't hear a solid click. It just sort of pushes in, and you're like, okay, I guess that worked. I'm going to pull this down and shoot him. It's fairly powerful. It's funny, like, you know, when I grew up, spring-loaded weapons were considered a no-no, but by 1993, G.I. Joe was all about gimmicks, and everybody came with one of these. All right, what else does he have? He has 2 rifles, and I'd love to tell you what these are, but the file card does not explain exactly what they're supposed to be. It just calls them 2 rifles. Does he need 2 different rifles? I don't know. Here's the first one. I have no idea exactly what this is based on in the real world. It's got a small stock, a huge handle, clip down here, and then some sort of weird muzzle. This one's slightly more realistic to me somehow, but maybe it's because there's just so much detail. There's the arc clip that hooks into the side, a longer stock. He holds it down here, and there's a forearm grip as well, and then a scope. I don't know. So I guess I could sort of see this being the kind of weapon he might take into, say, a smoky hallway or a debris-ridden warehouse that Cobra just tossed some grenades into. He can't really grip that forearm thing. That's just too big for him. So even though this is sort of designed for 2 hands, he can really only hold it with 1, unfortunately. Finally, he's got this shield. Let's pop this out. You know what? I think that this is my favorite accessory along with the figure stand. I know he's got to have a gun. I would have been okay with like 1 gun and 1 shield, especially if it meant that like maybe these could have come in more color. This is yellow because it's gimmicky. At least these are black. These are just like a nice dark black. That works. This clips onto his forearm a lot better than the spring-loaded missile thing. That's a cool shield. An urban assault soldier would definitely benefit from a riot shield. Maybe this could have been bigger, but for a toy, it works pretty well, and it certainly identifies him as just a Cobra guy, which is good. I really dig that, actually. He had the articulation that was normal for G.I. Joes in 1993. That meant he could turn his head from left to right and move it up and down. His arm had a pin here, a hinge, so he could move it up close to 90 degrees to his body, just a little bit more. He could swivel it all the way around. He also had a hinge at his elbow, so he could bend his arm 90 degrees. He had a swivel at the bicep, which meant that he could move his forearm all the way around. He had a rubber O-ring inside that connected the torso and the legs. That meant he could move around a bit. He could spread his legs apart about so far. He could bend at the hip about 90 degrees and bend at the knee about 90 degrees. For this late in G.I. Joe's run, 1993, keep in mind that this was the second to last year of this run. That meant that they were starting to get into the really weird sci-fi stuff. We're not just talking eco-warriors at this point. We're talking dinosaurs and aliens the following year. That's the stuff that was coming out. So when you compare it to that, this guy seems almost tame. I mean, if you put him up against, some of the original G.I. Joes, he might look slightly outlandish. But really, when you break it down, it's only because of how bright this yellow is. And at least it's uniformly yellow and black. A very simple color scheme. I wanted, at first, to simply say that this was a goofy figure. But going through it in detail, looking at it critically, no, I think that this guy actually is a pretty damn awesome figure. I don't love how bright this yellow is. It keeps it from being a perfect action figure. But now I sort of understand why people kind of like the Alley Viper in general, because this guy had a lot of repaints. This is the second version, but over the years they produced tons of these. Let's take a look at his file card to finish up this review. The file card in general had a lot less information about the character itself because at this point in time they used almost a third of the real estate on the file card to list his features, although they were quite vague. For instance, his face mask is called a special blast-proof trooper helmet with adjustable visor. Well, obviously. He has a high-bore bulletproof body armor suit and vest. Okay, fair enough. A computerized missile launcher with urban assault gun. That's his gimmick. I don't really know what's computerized about it. He's got a Cobra laser-proof shield. I think that helps indicate how sci-fi things were at this point in time, that they are saying that it's laser-proof. He's got special issue Cobra street boots. That is about the most generic thing you could possibly say. And he's got Cobra canister grenades. Well, that's fair. And then it just has some random bullet points of other things that he supposedly has, including Cobra communications watch, Cobra street/viper knife, we'll assume that's the knife across his chest, and let's see, a Viper toss hurling attack bola urban camouflage. Urban camouflage, I guess, is the yellow color and stripes. Now that I read this carefully, I'm going back here to this section that I thought might have been like grenades but was too small. No, I didn't know by just looking at it, but that must have been the attack bola. And it's very hard to see, I know, because it's a quite small detail. As far as his watch, I don't see it. It says that he's got a Cobra communications watch, but I do not see that. Let's read the rest of his file card. Okay, he's got codename Cobra Alley Viper. Fair enough. Primary military specialty, urban assault trooper. Secondary military special, parasite driver. That's interesting. I wish I had the original Alley Viper to compare it to, because I'm pretty sure he did not have that as part of his role. Tying it into the vehicle is interesting because obviously this was just a carded action figure. It was not a figure that came with the vehicle, but it calls him the Parasite driver. All right, they've got a quote, not attributed to anybody. It says, "We aren't afraid of taking over any city, except maybe some parts of New York." And we get a paragraph describing the Alley Viper. "The Alley Vipers are an elite contingent of ruthless marauders and true masters of brutality. Despite their destructive powers and feared reputations, Cobra was dissatisfied with them and recently outfitted a new breed of Alley Vipers that make the old ones look like nerdy wimps. Extensive physical and terrorist training programs are standard for these vicious vipers, and they soon become skilled villains and dangerously full of hate. You definitely don't want to invite one of these gorillas to dinner or anywhere else." So they sort of start off telling us that these guys are badasses, but end by undercutting all of that with some really weird jokes. You don't want to invite these gorillas to dinner, ... or anywhere else. Well, no, of course I don't. I don't want to invite any of Cobra to dinner. They're terrorists. That's what it says on the front. Cobra, enemy. Assault gun, shoots. Yeah, this doesn't look like a nice guy. Big surprise. I don't want to invite him to dinner. So that is the Alley Viper version 2 and the comic book Jungle Fury from 1993. You know what? Fun stuff. I had fun reviewing it, taking a look at the comic book. I've gotten what I needed out of it. I don't have a G.I. Joe collection anymore. I had a huge one when I was a kid. It's time for me to pass this on to one of my friends that still collects G.I. Joe. I will mention this. I had this particular figure new back in 1993. Now in 1993, I was mostly out of G.I. Joe, for the most part. I was reading the comic book, but I was not buying the toys because I was in high school and I had a part-time job. I worked at the Walgreens drugstores. Part of that meant I had an employee discount, and one day, on a complete whim, I saw this guy, or really I think I was the one that was putting up the new G.I. Joe figures on the pegs, and I was just like, you know what? It looks kind of fun. It looks kind of cool. And I bought him. I really do not remember the comic book being part of it. So, unfortunately, this is just something I'm trying to go off of memory. It may have existed at that point in time, but I think I would have kept this if that were the case. So this may not have been in every carded version of this action figure. This may have only been, for half the year or 1/4, something like that, a special promotion. I can't remember. But I did have this guy. I didn't really play with him. It was just sort of something I got on a whim. It may have literally been the last G.I. Joe I bought. There might have been another that I got in a similar situation while I was working there, and I just decided to get it because it was only a couple bucks. I can't remember, unfortunately. But it is fun to see this guy again. It was fun to review it for you, and I hope you'll come back and take a look at some of my other videos where I review comics and occasionally toys. Thanks a lot.